Hello, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Michael Green. I'm the CEO of Social Progress Imperative, and we're delighted in partnership with our friends Cognitio to be bringing you the What Works Virtual Summit. And thanks in particular to our supporters of this event, ATB Bank, the sponsors of the What Works series, Breckenridge Capital, who are sponsors of our Global Social Progress Index, and our strategic partner, Deloitte as well. Thank you all, and thank you all for being here with us. Now, we have those who are watching on the Zoom, we have the chat function enabled so that you can chat to everyone. And let's kick off by telling us where are you in the world? How's the weather? What did you have for breakfast? What did you have for dinner? Tell us something about where you are. I'm going to kick off. I'm going to say greetings from sunny London. So we're going to reply to everyone. Let us know who you are and where you're coming in from for today's What Works Forum. Let's pop it into the chat. Excellent. Lots of stuff. Well, we have sunny Reykjavik, Austria, rainy DC, Mexico, El Salvador, Georgia. Welcome to Georgia, and Armenia, Quito, Eastbourne, Amsterdam, Costa Rica, Toronto. Can't come back. So welcome everyone from wherever you are. Lovely to have you with us. So just say a few things about the housekeeping of how we're going to run this. We've got people here on the Zoom call in the meeting. Also following us on a live stream on Facebook and YouTube. You're very welcome too. Sorry we can't get your messages, but glad you could join us on the live stream. As I said, the chat's enabled for those in the Zoom call. You can chat to everyone, use it judiciously, but it's a great way to connect. We're going to have some question and answer sessions later in some of the panels. There's a specific Q&A function there. We'll give you guidance on how to use that. If you want to see more about the agenda, that's available on the What Works and SPI website. So you find out who these people are and who we're talking to and about what. But you can find all those details. Everyone will be introduced as we go ahead. And do feel free to join in the conversation on social media. We have some hashtags here, What Works 2022, so hashtag social progress and at SOC progress. Please do use those tags and join in the conversation online. So let us kick ourselves off as we think about an interconnected world. Let's have a quick poll to get ourselves going. Let's bring this first poll up. We'd love to get your views, everyone. We got a poll coming. Here we go. Who do you trust most to advance social progress? Government, business, or civil society? Tough to choose, I know, but who do you trust most to advance social progress? Give us your votes now. Who is most trusted? Who do you trust to deliver social progress? Government, business, or civil society? Our results coming in. Whose responsibility is it? Who do you think is going to deliver the best job? Do we have votes in? Do we have a result? Here we go. Well, there we go. If we want social progress, we've got to look to civil society to deliver it, say 2/3 of you. A sixth say government and a sixth say business. Interesting. Well, let's see how we feel maybe later on about this and where the priorities are. Right, to kick us off, I would like to have a quick conversation with David Whiten. David is the Managing Director for Social Innovation at ATB Bank, who kind sponsors of this event. David, you're very welcome. It's lovely to see you. Perhaps I can kick off with a question, sort of 3 parts. I mean, ATB is a novel institution, so perhaps tell people a little bit about what ATB is. Why is ATB interested in social progress? And what does a Managing Director of Social Innovation do?
So ATB is actually not a bank. It's ATB Financial, and we offer banking services, but there is a clear distinction that we're not a bank. It's a provincial bank. So in Canada, the province of Alberta, primarily is where we do all of our business with residents of Alberta. And that's starting to have the opportunity for us to actually cross borders. So there's some exploration going on there, but that's where we operate. What was your next question? Sorry.
Why does ATB care about social progress? And what does a managing director of innovation do?
Sure. So obviously the reason why we care because is this where we all work, live, do business. We're very concerned with the well-being of Albertans. Our mission is we make it possible. And it is different for everybody, but from a business standpoint or a personal banking standpoint, it might be to buy a new home. It might be to save your first $500. We work hard with Albertans to try and make those aspirations come true. And when we think about we exist to make it possible from a social standpoint, we're really thinking about the needs of today, but also the needs of tomorrow. And so how do we make it possible for future generations is kind of what's on our mind these days and where we're heading. It's interesting that the title of having innovation in your title, because I'm pretty new to the role, not new to ATB, but I have a lot of experience in the nonprofit sector. And when I saw the term innovation in this role before I took it on, it really signaled to me that ATB was ready to look at how we're doing things and to break the mold of traditional models and to think about how we partner, how we move forward, how we focus on what difference we can make in the lives of Albertans. And it really does break down those models and allow you to take more of an entrepreneurial spirit, I think, even a visionary approach, and have some audacity to think that you can actually make sustainable change versus, cutting a check and helping people out and for, the next month. And there's a lot of great work that we do today that we're going to build upon. But I think as we move forward, we're really going to start to focus a little bit more.
It's a very sort of particular institution with this very strong connection with place. Now, David, I know that you've worked in the non-profit sector in the past as well as I was working out with ATB Financial. I'm just thinking about the poll we had earlier about who's responsible for delivering social progress, and 2/3 of respondents said the civil society sector. I mean, just think about having sat on both sides of the fence, if I can call it. How do you see business and the non-profit sector collaborating and working together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I don't think it's any one sector's responsibility. I think it's all of our responsibility, whether it's what you can bring to the table. So, as a corporation, obviously, there's funding available. There's a commitment to CSR policies, all of that sort of stuff. From the social sector, you have the expertise, dealing with whatever the cause or issues might be. But it also takes government, it also takes school boards, it also takes so on and so on and so on. And I think the idea behind collective impact really makes a lot of sense. So the idea of breaking down this, it's corporations writing checks to charities, and then this charity's responsibility. Coming from my background in nonprofit, that used to drive me crazy, because we have, just use mental illness for an example, and you've got people on the street. How is that a nonprofit's responsibility? How is that not everyone's responsibility? And when we take donor dollars and apply it to today's needs, that I think is everyone's responsibility, I get a little antsy, because I think donor dollars are dollars that people have provided above and beyond their tax dollars. And I think those dollars are visionary dollars trying to build a better world. And for those dollars to go direct to solving today's problems that are affecting all of us, I'm not sure that that's exactly what the intention should be. And sometimes I think it allows governments even to say, oh, well, they've got this covered, we don't need to worry about that. And absolve themselves of the responsibility that really the government, represents us all. And I think that for current immediate needs, I think we all need to take a bigger role in that. And that really is a reflection on our society and our governments, the people we vote to represent us.
I think this is a perfect segue into my last question, which is we've made the theme of this event interconnected. What does interconnectedness mean for you, David?
Yeah, it's funny, when I worked at United Way, we actually had a commercial on television that talked about the interconnectedness of tree roots of some tree species. And basically their strength comes from holding on to each other underground so that they all don't fall over. Not one tree falls over because they're all connected to each other. And I think about that in terms of our partnerships that we have, that interconnected partnerships really, nobody can succeed unless we all succeed. It's not just that you have a partnership with, X organization who's going to produce this output that you hope will achieve an outcome. We don't succeed in what we're trying to do as a company and the impact we want to have on society unless our partners also succeed. And I think that's how I view it. And I think it's critical to how we move forward with partnerships in the social sector for sure.
That's terrific. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us. And, on behalf of SBI, the collaboration with ATP Financial on the What Works series and also on the work we've done together on the Social Progress Index for Alberta has been a great privilege and pleasure for us. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. We're proud to be a part of it.
Great. Thank you. Now, but to kick us off, I thought we might have a little look on the interconnectedness theme around some of the key findings of the 2022 Global Social Progress Index that came out a couple of weeks ago. I want to focus a bit on the broad global story of how this works. So let me just share my screen. So I'm sure many of you know the Social Progress Index is built around this basic framework where we bring together these 12 components of what makes a successful society for the people within it. Does a society deliver basic human needs? Does it deliver foundations of well-being? And does it deliver opportunity? And then what we do is we go out and we find existing secondary data to answer these questions. And for the 2022 Social Progress Index, we've managed to pull together 60 different indicators from a whole range of trusted data sources so that we can measure 169 countries. And we've been able to measure 169 countries with data covering the last 11 years. And so we've found that the world actually has been getting a bit better. We know that 159 countries, almost all of the countries have improved by at least 1 point or more since 2011. And we actually know that 79 countries have improved by 5 points or more. So that's good news. The world is getting better. The majority of countries are getting better. And a lot of the countries, almost half of the countries, are getting better significantly. And if we take that, we can actually look at some real success stories. And so we've got 4 countries in the world which have shown an improvement of more than 10 points over the period of 2011 to 2022. And I thought there's never a bad moment to have a Flags of the World quiz. So in the chat, I hope you're going to help me out here. Can you tell me which flags these countries represent? So starting on your left, can anyone name this country? I hope I can see the chat on this. Anyone got any answers on this one? No, that was the Gambia. Did anyone get that? No. The second one, anyone on this one? This indeed is Guinea-Bissau. There we go. This one, maybe someone's going to get this one. Sierra Leone. And then finally on the right is the crescent of clue. Yes, it is Uzbekistan. So these four countries have shown a really significant improvement. Now, if we add this up for the world as a whole, we can then sort of weight all these results, all different country results, to see how our world is getting on. And the good news is that the world as a whole has improved by 5.40 points in the last 11 years. So the world has improved significantly on social progress. However, we do also see that the rate of progress has slowed in the last 5 years. And I think we know that there are things like COVID, but there may be other things going on as well that have been slowing down this rate of progress. We think, if we think of social progress index as a proxy measure for the sustainable development goals, I mean, we've been thinking it was the SDGs wouldn't be achieved by 2030, but by the end of this century. It may be, if this slowdown continues, and if the world actually does tip into a social progress recession and go backwards next year, that the SDG target date may be slipping into the next century. So the world is improving, but nowhere near fast enough to get to where we want to get to. So there's a worrying trend in the world despite some improvement. And we can see what's going on here a bit by breaking the results down by the different components of the social progress index. And we can see that there's been, solid progress in some of these areas like nutrition and basic medical care, water and sanitation, and shelter over the last 11 years. Safety, pardon me, has been quite slow progress. Access to basic knowledge, school level education, actually progress has been pretty slow, and it really sluggish over the last 5 years. I think the world is finding that getting kids into school is doable. Achieving better learning outcomes is a lot harder. Access to information and communications, there's been a big driver of the improvement in social progress globally over the last 10 years. Access to mobile phones has dramatically improved people's access to information. This is a real thing in the world, but it may be that this sort of boost to social progress is starting to slow down as mobile phones become ubiquitous. We see that health and wellness has improved solidly over the last 10 years, and environmental quality has inched forward. But then we start to get into the more difficult news. A significant decline in personal rights, little improvement on personal freedom and choice, and stagnation on inclusiveness. And then we see a little bit of improvement around sort of steady improvement on access to advanced education. So behind the overall story, we see different patterns across different aspects of social progress. What we also see is different geographical trends. Now, obviously, we can't cover every country in the world. So what I've just done is summarize this by region. I mean, a good piece of news that we see in this data is that the world is actually converging. The gap between the highest and lowest social progress regions has narrowed over the last 10 years. And that's a good thing. That's something we want. We see that the top line is North America, only 2 countries in there, the US and Canada. There's been limited progress over this period. The second line down is Europe, and Europe's had steady progress of 3 points over the period of the last 10, 11 years. And we would kind of expect this. The most advanced countries are not going to improve as quickly as those that are catching up. And then we see at the other end of the scale, we see that sub-Saharan Africa has improved by 6.7 points over this period, South Asia by 7.4 points. So those at the bottom of the ranking so far have seen faster growth. We are seeing convergence. Interesting that South Asia has improved faster than sub-Saharan Africa. We've seen some quite significant improvements in Central Asia and the Caucasus. And maybe also worth flagging that progress in Latin America has been quite sluggish. The pale green line, Latin America has only improved by 3 points, 3.2, 3.3 points over the last 10, 11 years. Not much faster than Europe. You'd be expecting Latin America to be moving forward faster, but Latin America has shown quite sluggish growth in social progress over the last 10 years. Before we drill in a bit further, we do have to take a brief moment to look at the wall of shame. The wall of shame is the 4 countries that have gone backwards on social progress since 2011: Libya, Syria, Venezuela, and alas, my own country, the United Kingdom. Not very good at all. The UK really has not done well on social progress over the last 10 years. Venezuela's had the most dramatic reduction, but these are the 4 countries that have actually gone backwards on social progress over the last 11 years. A rather ignominious achievement for these countries. Now, I mentioned how there were different aspects of social progress moving at different paces. And one of those where we've seen real challenges has been around personal rights. And I just wanted to drill a little further into this by looking at the regional perspective on this as well. And here we see the world is converging, but in a bad way. We're seeing that the range of different scores on personal rights have narrowed, but largely because of declines in most regions. North America has declined significantly, Europe has declined somewhat, Latin America and Caribbean has declined. The only region where we've seen any real improvement has been in Central Asia and the Caucasus. So there's a global pattern. 111 countries have seen personal rights decline over the last 11 years. A lot of focus on the issues facing the world have been around COVID and climate change, etc. But I think we do need to shine a light on the fact that there is a real problem with the world going backwards on rights. That is not a regional problem, it's a global problem affecting pretty much every region of the world. One other piece of analysis I'd share to you, especially on the theme of interconnectedness, is thinking about sustainability and climate change. For this year's Global Social Progress Index, we took a look at the carbon efficiency of social progress. So this was basically looking at a country's social progress score and seeing what was how much carbon was required, how much greenhouse gas emissions were required to produce this level of social progress, to help us understand which countries are being really efficient, minimizing the amount of carbon they produce to generate social progress, and those that are being inefficient, creating a large amount of carbon for the progress that they're making. And what we found was that it wasn't a simple pattern of rich countries at the top, poor countries at the bottom. We actually see that the best performing region was Latin America and the Caribbean. We see that though Europe does well, it's actually a very mixed picture. Europe has some of the best performers and some of the worst performers. And across different regions, we see there's a very mixed pattern here about how well countries are performing. And this is critical because if we're going to be delivering inclusive and sustainable growth, we've got to be able to improve these scores. And the good news is that we have, over the last 10 years, seen improvements in the carbon efficiency of social progress. Countries are getting better at using carbon more efficiently in how they generate social progress, real well-being for their citizens. And this has got to be part of our framework for thinking of how we tackle the climate emergency. We will not tackle a climate emergency if the answer is to stop progress. That's an unsellable proposition. We need a way to create sustainable and inclusive growth that brings real benefits to people, which is why a just transition has to be around the decarbonisation of our economies and accelerating the efficiency with which we're producing social progress from our economic progress. Those are the 2 sides of the challenge that we face, which this data demonstrates. That is a very quick survey of the overview of our key findings. And we're going to move into a discussion led by our Communications Director, Sophie Sutherland. Sophie, over to you.
Thanks, Michael. It's good morning. Well, I'm sitting here in Austin, Texas, so it's morning for me. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to lead the opening panel discussion. So if I could ask Megan Weir and Rob Fernandez and Arturo Franco to please join me. Great, good morning, everyone. Or actually, I'm going to start with you, Megan, because I feel like you got the short end of the straw on this. Why don't you tell everybody? So this is Megan Weir. She's the Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Social Impact at the University of New South Wales, which is in...
New South Wales in Australia. Hi, everyone. I'm actually joining from Victoria, so unceded Woiwurrung and Bunurong. It's nice to see you all.
And it is, I think, something like 1:30 a.m. for you. So like I said, you've got the short straw, and we appreciate you being here greatly. And also joining us is Arturo Franco, who's with the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. Good morning, Arturo. Where are you today?
I'm in New York City, as you can see from my background.
It does look nice. And finally, Robert Fernandez, who's joining us from Breckenridge Capital. Where are you today?
I'm in Boston, and thank you, Sophie, for your help with the link and getting on. I appreciate that.
All good. I'm glad it worked out in the end. I'm glad it worked out here. So I thought, the theme of the event is interconnected, and this particular discussion is focusing on how we can leverage interconnectedness for a more sustainable and resilient future. I think COVID showed us and taught us more than anything else. I mean, it's taught us a lot over the last few years, but certainly the thing that really stood out is just how connected we are as people, but also as systems. Whether it's global supply chains, whether it's through health, everything seems to be connected. David gave the tree analogy earlier when he started, and I thought that was such an interesting and quite positive way to look at interconnectedness. And so I thought I'd just start, if I may, by asking Arturo, let's start with you. What does interconnected mean to you in the work that you do, and certainly as we think about advancing social progress?
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. Well, let me start with a personal answer. I think the reason why I have dedicated a big part of my career to understand the challenges of development, of economic growth, of inequality, is because I think interconnectedness means really putting a human lens on the systems that you just mentioned, right? Like, what is really the purpose of the economy? What is the purpose of our social systems? And acknowledging that unless we make sure that all people and all places and even our planet, to what Michael was saying, is in with the progress, technological or material, that we are achieving, it will not be sustainable, and we will not truly achieve that progress. For MasterCard, I think interconnectedness is at the core of what the company does. It is the network of networks, connecting consumers and merchants and banks and the financial system. And I think as a technology company, MasterCard is really committed to financial inclusion. It's one of the ways that we think about how, again, to bring people along, to on-ramp into the digital economy and into the financial system. And the key question that the Center for Inclusive Growth tries to answer is very similar to how Michael ended his presentation, which is, can we achieve sustainability, inclusion, and economic growth all at once? And I think that is the challenge that we have ahead of us.
That's great. And just to follow up on that, was there anything, just especially like given your background, was there anything you found surprising from the results that Michael shared earlier?
I wouldn't say it was surprising. I just spent 2 weeks ago here in the United Nations General Assembly, and you could see, and now with the World Bank meetings this week, and the report and the prospects of 70 million people being pushed back into extreme poverty. Also spending some time on a personal basis in the board of Article 19, which is a human rights NGO. I think I kind of understand that the world has moved from a kind of like post-war, honeymoon phase of growth and happiness, post-Cold War, I guess, to take a turn in many ways that is quite strange, right? Like we've seen. As Michael alluded to, personal rights go back, freedom of expression, freedom of information. We've seen a kind of anti-democratic bent. We've seen the economy leave so many people behind that it became quite shallow. Headline numbers kept going up, but most people's lived experiences was not tracking. And so I kind of, even though I feel kind of quite overwhelmed by everything that's happened, you add a pandemic, a war, and and everything, and the climate change. I kind of expected it. I was surprised to see the UK in the bottom 4. I think it's something that I'd love for social progress imperative to double down on, because it feels to me that's a country that was, kind of developed, and so how much of that is self-inflicted, and what can other countries draw as lessons from the UK example I think is an interesting observation.
Yeah, no, definitely. Megan, if I can turn to you next, I'd love for you to explain a little bit more about the work that you're doing at the Centre for Social Impact, and what interconnected means to you in that work, with the hat that you sit with.
Thanks, Sophie. I lead the Australian Social Progress Index in the calculation, but the other part of work that we do really links in with interconnectedness when we think about how is it that we can work with not-for-profits or other civil society organisations, as well as government and industry as well, really recognising that each of those different sector stakeholders have very different but important roles to play if we are looking at moving towards progress, or if we're wanting to understand what a healthier, more inclusive society looks like. And I think the other thing when I'm thinking about what interconnectedness looks like is, we're thinking about individuals and communities and systems also being interconnected. And so I think when we talk about what things look like in recovery from COVID, or as we continue to move through COVID, we need to really be keeping that equity mindset at the front of mind as well. And that's something that we really try to pay attention to with the work that we do at the Centre for Social Impact. And we really are trying to use data and research as a way of helping support, particularly the not-for-profit sector, in understanding the impact of the work that they do. So I think there is a risk sometimes in the amount of data that can get created and get collected constantly. And, academics, we're guilty of this as well. We collect a huge amount of data, and that can almost become overwhelming to the fact that to the extent that the data actually becomes a bit meaningless because you don't know where to be looking. And so I think that's where something like the Social Progress Index is so useful, because it is intended to be actionable. It's directed in a way that's focused on outcomes, as opposed to just creating a bunch of numbers on a screen. And so if we can be helping utilize data that's been collected by governments, by not-for-profits, by industry, in terms of identifying and understanding where there's pain points at the moment and where we can predict there to be pain points in the future as well. They're kind of the real, the sweet spots for the work that academic institutions can be filling in terms of this interconnected way of trying to achieve progress in the future. But also, be bringing that element of reflection and critical feedback to, I would say, particularly government in the way that data functions.
Great. Yeah, that's a really good point. How do you kind of bring it all together? And is there a thread that data can play when it comes to aligning academics, government, and others on the way forward? And Rob, you are the head of ESG research for Breckenridge Capital, and I feel like interconnected might mean something different to you when it comes to the lens that you look at from an ESG perspective, but then also from a personal point of view. I'd love you to share kind of your thoughts on what this all means, and how it all how you see everything playing out in the world that you're inhabiting right now.
Oh yeah, thank you, Sophie. Yeah, as Sophie mentioned, I'm Director of ESG Research for Breckenridge Capital Advisors. We're a fixed income manager in Boston. And I guess, when we think of interconnectedness, it's been about developing partnerships, kind of like Megan said, partnerships with other organizations to help make progress, either progress within the capital markets to make them more sustainable, as well as progress in our own investment approach. And I can expand on that, but I can expand on it in that we have partnered with a number of nonprofit NGO organizations over the years to help advance our thinking when it comes to how best to invest sustainably for our clients. So, for example, we've had really great partnerships with organizations like Ceres, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which is now part of the International Sustainability Standards Board, as well as the PRI, the Principles for Responsible Investment. All really great organizations that have a lot of unique perspectives and a lot of subject matter experts that we have kind of worked with in a variety of ways to kind of help move the ESG integration effort forward. We feel that we were a little bit on the early side, kind of more of a pioneer in terms of ESG integration. So we thought that by collaborating in this way with these organizations, it helped advance and kind of promote the value of integrating ESG risks in the investment process. But then also, we learned a lot from these organizations and how best to carry out what we were hoping to do. And then, another example too is the partnership with the Social Progress Index. Over the years, it's been a really great partnership to kind of interconnect what we're doing with what you're doing. And we were informed by your expert research and incorporated the SPI's thinking into our approach to assessing environmental, social, and governance risks for local governments in the United States. So that's kind of how I think about interconnectedness at Breckenridge. And then kind of personally, I personally get a lot of value and in terms of working with others in a collaborative way to try to make a difference within my local community. I serve as a town meeting member, local government form of governance within Massachusetts, and voting on kind of local policies, spending, that kind of interconnectedness I find really valuable and enriching by working with others within our town to make decisions that hopefully would make lives better for our local community. So that's just kind of a brief example, but I just find it very enriching professionally and social and individually.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. I mean, I think when you think about the financial systems and markets, there's been so much conversation about the importance of ESG, right? And like you are obviously on the earlier side, but there's been sort of this tsunami of firms moving to ESG. And I'm wondering, I think the big challenge has been, how do you get to the S in ESG versus the E, and separating them out. But to me, it seems like they're really all interconnected, right? It seems like, so I'm wondering how you approach things in terms of thinking about them as interconnected systems versus examining them differently, and how that sort of helps drive some of the decision making.
Oh, that's a great point. We think a lot about the interconnectedness of environmental and social risks. We think about it in terms of, the local coastal community in the United States that's being, slowly impacted by sea level rise. What we think about, okay, that's going to have an impact on infrastructure. A community will have to adapt over time, but what does that do with the residents there? How are they? How will that community need to respond? Will the residents on the coastal area need to move? Will there be kind of migration associated with that? And we're starting to see that, in very early days in a couple areas. But that's just one kind of brief example where we think about an environmental issue can have a social impact in an area. And there's other examples like that on the corporate side. But overall in our research, we do find that environmental and social and governance considerations can be looked at in isolation. But to your point, it can be more meaningful when you look at them together. Maybe one last example: when you think about a company, you want to look for strong management and strong governance. Without that, the environmental and social aspects cannot necessarily happen. A company can't necessarily improve their environmental footprint without strong management and strong governance practices. So those are a couple of brief examples.
Yeah. That's great. Arturo, I'm wondering if you could jump in here. When you think about the kinds of projects you're looking to fund and bring people and ideas, how much does that sort of intersection between climate and social and data-led initiatives? Like, how much does that play a factor? Are you sort of looking at them in isolation? Are you thinking about their impact on each other? Like, what's your kind of strategy there?
Yeah, I think the starting point is I think to some of Rob's points, the acknowledgement that what does the private sector bring into this conversation? I think it brings innovation and technology and business models that can also play a role in the human and social progress space. ESG, I think, is a very strong mechanism to align or integrate the business strategy with those aspirations for wider impact. So I think that's a great framing. But I think ESG only works if it's really embedded and integrated across the organization, with management, with governance, and mostly if it's really authentic to what the organization is about. So for us, financial inclusion is really like, it's in our DNA. It's we have, kind of like a strong competitive advantage to other organizations to try to do that work, and that's why we focus on that. I think on the measurement side, the conversation about, how incredible would it be to apply the same level of rigor and science-based, targets, etc., that we are applying on the E of ESG to the social category, even though the social category is a bit more noisy and more disparate. And I think that's where tools like the Social Progress Index could really play an important role, because they can allow us to kind of compare different outcomes in different geographies, even sub-national geographies, as you are moving into measuring that in many countries, as kind of like the ultimate impact measurement of some of these social category investments. And so I think we at Mastercard, to answer your question, we think about it in a quite integrated way. We think a lot about spillover effects and interactions between climate and social. I think to Michael's point earlier, we cannot solve climate change or go into a climate transition that creates inequality or that creates social issues in like we need to solve all problems at the same time, right? And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how those things interact with each other.
Great. Megan, you spend obviously a lot of your time focused on the research side of things, but then also really like working to try to get policy moving in these areas. Like, what's your approach for kind of those sorts of collaborations, and how you kind of make sure that, even if you're pushing one specific area, that others aren't lost, and that you're kind of lifting, as Arturo said, like we're lifting everything all together at the same time. Like, I'm curious, what's your approach to that?
I think it's about trying to define or identify a narrative that everyone can get behind. And I think that's what something is so nice about the Social Progress Index, right? Is that at its core, the function of the Social Progress Index is something that everyone can identify with in some way. And just this discussion on ESGs, and I think is really relevant here as well, in terms of, in Australia, we're seeing this at the moment, the impact of climate change we're seeing on the social outcomes that we're seeing at the moment, in terms of like massive flooding that we had earlier in the year, increasing homelessness, and also having the impact on personal safety and health and wellness and things like that. So I think if you can kind of be saying that, even if a particular policy area might be focused on housing and homelessness, for example, how is it that you can bring stakeholders that are in the not-for-profit sector and government and industry that might be interested in climate change, or they might be interested in gender-based violence? How is it that you can bring them along in understanding that this seemingly disconnected social issue is actually relevant to them? And so I think, and really kind of, not dismissing that, there are different priorities or kind of different focus areas of these different stakeholders, but really trying to get everyone on board on a shared mission and a shared goal. And sometimes that requires you to go sort of, I guess, like a little bit more secondary in terms of what your overall theory of change is, or your overall mission. And I think that's something that I found the Social Progress Index to actually be really helpful in terms of helping everyone have a shared goal, shared mission that they're working towards together. And it becomes less about, I guess, internal politicking and more about working towards something together.
That's great. That's sort of common language as a way to kind of come together. If anybody has questions, we've got a few minutes left at the end. So if you've got questions and you're watching on YouTube, you can tweet at us at the hashtag, and we'll get those answered if we can. Or if you want to just put them in the chat if you're on the Zoom, or via the Q&A function. Either way, I guess the follow-up question to that, Megan, that I was thinking about was, how do you, I think it's great if you've got this kind of common language and you're trying to get everybody working together towards the same place and the same point. But obviously government works different to academic institutions, it works different to businesses. So are there any examples you can share of like where maybe, the different styles of working or the kind of ways of collaborating haven't quite come together or have worked in a way? Because I think that seems to always be the challenge, just from what I've heard anyway.
Yeah, I think there can be the challenge of bureaucracy that can exist both within universities, but also government as well, which can sometimes mean that this kind of innovation mindset that was being spoken about before, which I think could actually be really beneficial to a lot of like creatively addressing social issues, gets stymied a lot of the time. And, we're sort of seeing that at the moment with not-for-profits in Australia, is just the amount of bureaucracy that organizations are required to comply with in terms of reporting and things like that, means that so much resourcing and time gets taken up in terms of doing this basic, applying for funding consistently, doing the basic reporting, and it's all compliance rather than actually understanding whether the services that are being funded by government, for example, are actually achieving what they're setting out to. And so I think that can sort of be the challenge that we see a lot of the time, is that we're just collecting data for the sake of data, or we're sort of funding programs on a inputs or an outputs focus rather than an actual outcomes focus. And so I think where I've had some success with local government has been to really kind of shift that thinking away from outputs into outcomes in terms of understanding what that focus looks like, but also recognizing with that a lot of people that are held responsible for doing that outcomes-based kind of measurement or doing the frameworks aren't necessarily given the capacity or the training necessary to be able to do that well. So I think it's one thing to ask organizations, whether that's government or not-for-profit, to do outcomes-based reporting, but it's another thing actually kind of equipping them with the skills or the resourcing to be able to do it well.
Yeah, that's great. And we've only got a couple of minutes left. So just to kind of, I wanted to ask you all to kind of give me your final thoughts on if there's one lesson that you can share for the future about how we can create better partnerships, work better together towards this more sustainable, resilient future that we're all aiming for. Is there one takeaway? That's a really hard question to ask because I know it's not just one answer, but give me your top favorite one of, this is what we should be doing if we want to get to the Sustainable Development Goals, or if we really want to advance social progress and reverse some of the things that have happened over COVID. Like this is something we should focus on. And I'm going to start with you, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. That's a good question. I was thinking about that. Yeah, and I think the one area that would be really helpful is to realize that. Well, I guess it's the whole idea of what's the saying? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, or allow us to make some advancements. I think when it comes to the improvement in standardized ESG disclosure, we've come a really long way in not a long time, and there's been a lot of organizations that have done a great job to kind of come together, where it's, CDP, TCFD, PRI, SASB, there's all, CFA Institute more recently, there's all these organizations that are trying to move this forward. But then you get a lot of pushback, heavy pushback sometimes about, it can be better, things, we can be doing more. But so I guess that's what I would love to see, is that that a recognition of so much progress that has been made, and an acknowledgement that more needs to happen, and let's just kind of come together and make some good, continue to make good progress, and not just look for the ideal, because the progress that has been made has been good.
Great. Right. Same question, Arturo.
Yeah, I think Rob reminded me there's this African proverb that everyone knows: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think the first thing is partnerships are essential for progress, and particularly given the challenges that we have been talking about, that we're facing all at once right now. Every sector needs to do its part, and I think in that, partnerships are based on mutual trust, and trust, kind of relies on a common ground and common understanding of what the facts are and what reality is. And that's where I think good data and measurement can be a strong pillar of that, right? To create that trust, to create those strong partnerships, to ultimately create the progress that we all want to see and continue to see.
Great, thank you. And Megan, last final word to you.
I think when we're talking about partnerships and collaboration, it's always really important to consider not just who's in the room, but also who is being left out of the room or who isn't at the table. And so when we're considering what progress looks like, we really need to continue bringing this equity lens back into mind. And so racial equity being a really important one, and that has implications for things like data sovereignty and understanding how it is that we understand and measure progress. So I think that is something that I would be pushing across all sectors to really be considering in terms of partnerships. And sometimes it is about actually having to break down and recreate the system rather than just continuing the system as it is. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't, we should shy away from it just because it's a big task.
Yeah, that's a really great and important point to end on. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, and maybe the system just needs to be changed. And certainly, I think you're all doing incredible work to make that happen. So thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate your time. Megan, I hope that you're able to go to bed now. And thank you for being up so late with us. Rob, Arturo, thank you also. And Michael, I am going to hand back over to you.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Arturo, thank you, Rob, thank you, Megan. And it's in tribute to Megan staying up so late, I should report that one of the big findings of this year's Global Social Progress Index was that for the first time ever, United States has been knocked off the top spot on access to advanced education. It was Australia is now the #1 country in the world in access to advanced education. So congratulations, Megan, in the university sector in Australia, the world's #1. Arturo mentioned in the last session about the point about partnerships. And that's very much the way that we at SPI have always worked. We know that a global index on its own doesn't do anything. It only has an impact if these tools are taken up and developed and used by others. And so we've got a session now where we're going to bring in a number of our partners who are going to talk about what they've been doing using some of the tools and some of the collaborations we've done together. And it's a great delight to welcome the first of these presentations from Lewis Dijkstra, who is the head of the Economic Analysis Unit at DG Regio in the European Commission. And it's lovely to see you, Lewis, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Let me see if I can just pull up 2 slides for you, just to give you a nice little visual. I'm calling in from Brussels, Belgium today, and I'm very glad to be here and have worked with Michael and SPI for quite a while now. Now, let me see if I can, I think this should do the trick. Can you tell me if you can see it?
Perfect.
Okay, so a number of years ago, we were approached to develop a regional version of the Social Progress Index. And we did a first pilot in 2016, and that was very promising. So we thought, let's keep going with this. And what you see here is our second version, where we really try to improve it and get more data, get more regional data, and get data that really is specific to Europe. But we use exactly the same philosophy of, identifying what are the utopian values, what are the dystopian values, and so that we can also measure progress over time, because this is what it's all about, right? It's not understanding who is doing poorly now or well, but it's really to facilitate this progress. And on the map, you can see all of our regions, and you can see that most of the Nordic regions in Sweden, Finland, and Denmark do really well, as well as a couple of regions in the Netherlands. And then the worst performing regions typically are in southeastern Europe. So you see the lowest values in some of the more rural regions in Romania and Bulgaria, but also southern Italy and some parts of Greece, and don't do so well. So, but the overall index is almost too aggregate, right? We want to unpack this. We want to figure out, okay, what is behind all this? What can we learn? And so if we break it down into the three sub-indices, and I hope I don't have to explain to you what they all contain, although I can. The basic sub-index really looks at very basic issues like food, shelter, water, electricity. And virtually all of the EU regions were doing extremely well on this, close to the utopian value. On the poorest regions in Romania and Bulgaria score a little bit poorer on that. When we look at the foundations of well-being, then we start to see a more differentiated picture. You see parts of Italy and Spain not doing so well. You see a much more differentiated pattern in Belgium, France, Germany, and you see Sweden and Finland doing very well. But Denmark a little bit less. But then in the last one, when it comes to opportunity, there we really see a very different picture. And this is clearly the most challenging part of social progress, where we're looking at tolerance, where we're looking at respect, where we're looking at rule of law. And here you can clearly see that many regions in the EU need to up their game. And so for us, this was a very useful exercise to really understand what the different dimensions are of social progress and how we can improve them. Typically, the policy I represent, cohesion policy, relies on official statistics. We rely a lot on GDP per capita. We did see that GDP per capita, for example, is linked to the SPI, but especially very low levels of GDP per capita are linked to very low levels of social progress. But the highest regions, the higher your level of GDP, the weaker that link. So really, trying to maximize economic growth is not the only, it's a necessary but not sufficient conditions to ensure a high level of social progress. And so clearly there's something about reducing inequality and making sure that both social and environmental issues are sufficiently addressed. So from our point of view, that was really a useful input. Now, I know I can't talk too long, so maybe just a few things. We have presented this multiple times. Our regions have been working with this to develop their own strategies and to understand which issues they need to address in their regions to improve social progress. We think this is going to be an excellent guide to identifying policy priorities, and we're planning to do an update of this index every 3 years. So we're collecting the survey data, we're combining that with official data from Eurostat. So I think for us, this has been a very, very useful exercise that allows us to identify which dimensions, which issues need to be addressed where, and that's really the key bottleneck when you're trying to identify how to improve something as all-encompassing as social progress. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Lewis, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure working with you over the years, and we're thrilled with this collaboration. I think that chart really illustrates, I think if you break it down, you can see how different regions are moving in different ways. Great, thank you very much. And now moving to the other side of the world, delighted to be joined by Matawe Thamagason from the Sasin Business School in Thailand. Matawe, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're from, I hope you're doing well. It is an honor and privilege to have this opportunity to share the Social Progress Subnational Index for Thailand with you on this virtual forum. My name is Mitawi. I'm a researcher and project manager at the Sassoon School of Management of Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, Thailand. As we have recently celebrated our 40th anniversary, we are reaffirming our commitment to the UN Global Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you very much, Louis, for sharing your work. And it's very inspiring to see that the work that you've done has been helpful in developing your country's, the EU's policy. So I'm going to jump right into my presentation. So the what, the why, and the how. Why are we doing this? There have been events happening in Thailand that have gripped the whole nation, a crisis of huge proportions impends many provinces in Thailand, severe weather forecasts across central, northern, and southern Thailand throughout October 14th, causing widespread disruption due to the ongoing flooding. The southern region will be heavily affected in the next couple of months. Another tragic event is the 37 people that have been killed, most of them young children, in an unprecedented gun and knife attack at a preschool center in northeast Thailand. It was known locally that the attacker had drug addiction problems. Mass shootings in Thailand are rare, though in 2020, a soldier angry at his superior over a property deal killed at least 29 people and wounded 57 after opening fire in 4 locations, including a busy shopping mall in northeast Thailand. The attack and other recent reports of gun violence prompted public debate over gun ownership rates in the country. Mass shooting livelihoods and people being affected by the flood. These are some of the major issues we are facing as a country. This has exacerbated the already vulnerable groups of society in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Things like these are not directly measured by the GDP. This is the reason why we need a tool like the Social Progress Index that can help us measure things that are unaccounted for, but are fundamental and crucial to the lived experience of everyone in the society. Things that determine the quality of people's lives. Disruptions such as these are sending more vulnerable groups of people into poverty. Safety and security of people have been greatly compromised. Despite the increase in GDP per capita of the past decade, inequality remains a huge challenge for us. We created the Social Progress Index for the provinces of Thailand to inform policymakers and leaders the baseline data of the provinces that can be used to determine the most pressing issues in each province. We would like to harness the power of people and the private sector to work together with the public sector to improve identified issues. Sassoon School of Management would like to be a champion of change and impact, and we believe that the SPI framework can help us assess the situation based on data available and drive data-driven action that leads to the desirable impact and outcomes. I would like to give you an insight from the findings report. Nonthaburi is a province in the central region. It has a highest SPI score at 60.4 at the subnational level out of the 76 provinces. However, in the areas forewarned to be prepared for more water coming into the area. Almost 24,000 households in Nonthaburi have been affected by this flood. In other regions of Thailand, the situation is being worsened by a large volume of moving water down from flooding in the north of the country and from discharges from brimful dams. If you look at the social progress score for Thailand, the 3 components that we are underperforming are personal safety, access to basic knowledge, and personal rights. However, if you look at the subnational index we developed, personal safety has the highest average scores. We hope that the findings of the project will make clear the need for more granular information that can aid decision makers by pinpointing the most important issues to tackle. How can we get out of the middle income trap and induce inequality? Equipped with the insights of the tool, civil society can become stronger, take action, and demand for better living for all. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Social Progress Imperative team for being such a wonderful partner for Sasin School of Management and the support that you have given over the years to produce the National SPI for Thailand, especially Michael, Frank, Petra, Yaromir, Sophie, and everyone for organizing this virtual forum. I would like to if you would like to receive a copy of our findings report, please provide us with your email address by completing this Google form via this QR code, and we will send you the report directly to your email. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. I mean, I love the way you contextualized this work within the challenges that Thailand is facing. And I think also this point about, you talked about the middle income country trap. And I know this is something we talked to Michael Porter about, our chief academic advisor from Harvard Business School. When we started on this work, he was very clear, is that social progress isn't just a product of GDP per capita. There's actually an interrelation between economic and social progress. And if countries are going to break out of that middle income trap, investing in social progress is going to be a key investment that needs to be made. And so that's kind of these things are two linked together. And the work on the Social Progress Index of the provinces of Thailand will be a great tool, I'm sure, to help that and accelerate progress in Thailand. Matawe, thank you so much.
Thank
so
you.
we've been to Europe, we've been to Asia, and now we're going to take a different. We're going to take a corporate strand. We've also got a great relationship with Meta, which most of us know as Facebook, but it's Meta, and we're joined by Carlos Ahamuda from Meta, who is responsible for the Europe, Middle East, Americas, and Latin America region as a public policy manager. Carlos, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much, Michael.
Welcome.
I am starting my video now. I think it works. Yeah. Hi, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. First of all, I would like to thank SPI for the invitation to participate in this important virtual summit and for always being a great partner to work with on projects that aim to support organizations committed with positive social impact. Before telling you more about the project that SPI and Meta recently conceptualized together, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Carlos Ahumada, and as Michael was saying, I lead Data for Good at Meta partnerships in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, based out of London. Today, I'm going to present you a project that we have co-developed with Social Progress Imperative, and that's the Climate Perception Index. We believe this is a very important tool because it is an innovative tool that offers new insights on societal implications of climate change. This Climate Perception Index provides a fresh and unique perspective on people's awareness of climate change, the perception of the risk associated with it, and their commitment to climate action. We're aware that there have been some efforts around created indexes that have to do and try to measure the efforts that countries have made in regards to climate change and sustainability. But this is a new one in the sense that it measures people, awareness, knowledge, perception. And to our knowledge, it's one of the first efforts in this regard. So without further ado, let me quickly share my screen with you because there are like a couple of slides that I think could be interesting for you. So this is the Climate Perception Index. The Climate Perception Index is based on the 2022 edition of the Climate Change Opinion Survey that we conduct every year in partnership with Yale University. And it was developed by Social Progress Imperative with some funding from us. The Climate Perception Index of this year covers more than 100 countries around the world, and it's divided into different tiers. Here you see an image of the map of the world in which the countries are colored with different tonalities depending on their overall score when it comes to climate perception. The tier 1 countries are in green, the tier 6 countries are in red, and the scales between them measure the different levels that they have. The tier 1 are the best performing countries in relation to the index, and the tier 6 the worst performing when it comes to the measurements. The index was developed based on questions from Meta's 2022 Climate Change Opinion Survey, grouped into 3 dimensions of climate perceptions. The first one of those dimensions is awareness. And what we were trying to measure, and SPI thought about, is measure people's knowledge about climate change, if they think it is happening or not, and what is causing it, and the frequency with which people hear about climate change. The second dimension is the risk perception, and it measures the extent of the perceived risk of climate change from personal and intergenerational perspective, meaning how much I feel that climate change is going to affect me personally, and also how much I think climate change is going to affect future generations. The third dimension is commitment to action, and this aims to measure the willingness to adopt a pro-environmental behavior based on the importance of the issue, the perception on their government's involvement, and their country's accountability. And the last image that I want to share with you today is the actual ranking. This is a screenshot from the tool that Social Progress Imperative developed based on the index. And here we're seeing the climate perception overall index ranking. We can see, and just doing a quick analysis and visual analysis of what's happening, we can see that Latin American and Caribbean countries are ranking at the very top. That means that there is, like, in general, like a high sense of awareness, risk, and commitment to action in the region. Europe is also present. In fact, Portugal is ranking number 1st in the overall climate perception index. Southeast Asia, East Asian Pacific, Middle East, and North African countries, they are not as present, meaning that there are some efforts that need to be done to increase their awareness, the perception of risk, and their commitment to action. And in terms of Sub-Saharan Africa, we don't have also countries in the top 30, but there is an interesting exception, that is Malawi, ranking on number 10. And Malawi is actually ranked 1st in terms of the risk perception. Another important or overall learnings that we got from this index is that Finland performed best on climate change awareness, that there is a big variation in the performance of European countries, with the best performing being Portugal, and the country that performed worst is Czechia, ranking in number 97. So a big variation when it comes to European countries. And finally, we also observe a clear difference between North-South differences in terms of awareness. So with that, I would like to end up my presentation. Just a final notes on what I think works when engaging with stakeholders in terms of my experience and what I have seen. So the first one is very important to build trust by co-developing data sets and tools with experts, such as we have done with SPI, promoting therefore a cohesive ecosystem. Then we also need to continue building trust by openly sharing methodology behind the tools that we create and being open to the feedback from people that actually utilize the data. The third one is we have also to build this kind of tools like the index, having in mind that out of these data, we're going to create insights, and that ideally those insights are going to be turned into actions with actual repercussion into people's lives. Then we also need to continue building data sets and tools with having privacy preserving and privacy protection at the center of the process. We also need to take time to understand the policy goals and political context of different stakeholders so that actually they can utilize and leverage tools like the Climate Perception Index. And finally, we also need to start thinking on how we're going to support different government agencies and different stakeholders in different countries to build data skills, to interpret data, and make data actionable. So thank you very much again to SPI for the invitation of participating in this very important summit. And thank you again for being a great partner to us.
Carlos, the feeling is mutual. Thank you so much for a terrific presentation. As people may have seen in the chat, this is brand new research being published today. And we're really so excited that we can bring together what we're doing with the Social Progress Index, measuring outcomes using a lot of official data with something like this that leverages Meta's power to get sense of perceptions, etc. And just thinking about how this Climate Perception Index fits with what we saw earlier about the carbon efficiency of social progress. There's a whole set of analysis further we can do. And I know we've got some collaborations coming up around COP27 as well. So, Carlos, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to continuing this work together. Thank you. Great. And now a different twist now. We're going to take a little demographic twist. We're joined by Fabiana Marafa, who is the EU Policy Officer for the European Youth Forum. Fabiana, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you. Greeting from Brussels. Thank you very much for inviting me and such an amazing opportunity to discuss with you all. As you said, I'm Fabiana Marafa, Policy Officer at the European Youth Forum. Just a brief introduction on the platform. It's the biggest platform of youth organization in the world. I'm here to present to you all our reflection and thoughts after having produced together with SPI 2 editions of the Youth Progress Index, a tool that has been recognized as being the most comprehensive measure of youth well-being around the world. And this, I think, is a success for all of us and a success for the Beyond GDP approach. It measured more than 150 countries and is the first SPI to analyze a specific age and demographic of the population. I will not present to you the results of the index, but you're very welcome to have a look and visit the website. We are currently in the preparatory phase to kickstart the work on the 3rd edition of the index, and we are really, really enthusiastic to see how many stakeholders, how many organizations embrace the need to measure progress beyond GDP. However, one of the challenges, and I hear you talking about the same issue, is that policymakers and activists often lack the practical tool to embrace this approach. The Youth Progress Index is our solution to offer to those people. We strongly convey the message in our advocacy action that sustainable development and well-being should be driven force of the policy agenda. This means prioritizing for us what really matters, especially for young people, being physical and mental well-being, quality of education, quality of job, quality of the environment. The only way we can reach social progress is understanding that it cannot come, as many of you said, at the expenses of the environment or the future generations. Indeed, young people are affected as anybody else by the choices we made today, but they are also the ones that will live the longest the consequence of this decision. Those are the people that we should look for and listen to. And here comes the role of the Youth Progress Index. It's a concrete, actionable tool to support decision-making and policy-making. Not only does provide insights into young people's quality of life and well-being around the world, but it gives accurate pointers to see and capture social systematic change. For the future, we are moving exactly from the lesson we learned in the first two editions. And what works in advancing social progress is exactly the question that we are asking ourselves. We want to provide indeed young activists around the world with all the necessary tools to advocate for well-being, provoking a powerful wave of engagement and empowerment. To do that, in the future, we are planning to develop a user-friendly system. As Megan just earlier mentioned, it's very the sore point, the striking point is allow people to use the data we collect. So we are planning to implement this aspect, being user-friendly, being accessible, being transparent, and those are for us the key elements that gets stakeholder aligned on the goal. But we have to be very, very open on an important element, I think. The data will need to prove our point. The data we need to provide to embrace this understanding of social progress are not necessarily there. And especially when looking at the specific demographic of the population, age disaggregated data are not there. The 2030 agenda and also the European Union strategy for youth affirm that we need those age disaggregated data, but the data set out there are not sufficient. On the data of youth has been described as being a patchwork. And it is not always easy for us to make stakeholders understand that this is a huge, huge issue for us. We have collectively to acknowledge the situation, the limitation, be very transparent about it, and transparent about the limits of the resources that we use to assess progress, and at the same time advocate for protocols and methods to respond to this issue. To conclude, allow me to make a call to you all, because it's indeed an answer to the question, what works? Data literacy. Data literacy skills are crucial to empowering everybody, and especially young people, to make advantage of the tool we produce. Each and every one of us should strive to build a data literacy app in our own context, especially addressed to the younger among us. We should give them sufficient means to access, analyze, and interpret information, to design policy, advocacy, and project to promote sustainable development and ultimately change. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you very much for our partnership, and feel free to reach out to myself and the European Youth Forum.
Fabiana, thank you so much. And I'm always very fond to confess my sins. And I have to say, when we this idea was first proposed several years ago, I think my line was, well, it's very nice, but it's never going to work. Good luck. And so it's been terrific work by the European Youth Forum and the SPI team to actually be able to construct what I think is a very powerful tool. I think being able to look at different demographic groups, just as we've seen the power of disaggregating spatially with different geographies, to disaggregate in different demographic groups is incredibly powerful. And so I really commend to everyone to go and look at the data there and see how youth progress and social progress compare to one another. And we're very excited to the third edition coming out next year. Fabiana, thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, delighted to have with us Nick Hand, who's the Director of Finance Policy in the Data Unit of the Office of Comptroller of Philadelphia. Now, we've been doing a lot of work in US cities and counties over the last couple of years, and that's scaling more. But yeah, Philadelphia, we're really proud to be working with. So Nick, over to you. The floor is yours. Hello.
Oh, I am. Thanks, Michael. Just trying to start my video, but it says unable. Ooh, there we go. Success. Thank you. Thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the invitation to speak today and share our work about how we're using SPI in the city of Philadelphia. As Michael said, my name is Nick Hand. I'm the policy director and the data director in the controller's office for the city of Philadelphia. And the city controller, what we do, it's an elected local government position in the city of Philadelphia. And our office is really the financial watchdog. So, as the watchdog, we're primarily concerned with making sure, the local government here is running, operating efficiently and effectively and using taxpayer dollars, using it well. So to us, SPI, that might be sort of a unique partnership with SPI, but to us, the Social Progress Index really fits perfectly in with that mission. We really view it as not only a fantastic data tool, but also a tool of accountability that will allow us as the city government to better spend taxpayer dollars and invest in the neighborhoods and communities that are most in need. So moving forward, something that we hope to be able to do is incorporate the data tool. We're in the process of launching it. We hope to be able to incorporate it into our city's budget process, use its detailed metrics as a guide to really target city spending more strategically across the city. And our office really began exploring the SPI after the American Rescue Plan was passed in March of 2021 by the federal government in the US. And as part of that package, Philadelphia received $1.4 billion, which is really an unprecedented amount of money to come into the city all at once. Just for comparison, our annual budget is about $5.5 billion. So this was really a substantial amount of money coming into the city. So as our office sort of started to think about the best ways to use this federal relief and the best areas of investment, we really wanted to sort of target it strategically and tackle Philadelphia's biggest challenges. And unfortunately, the city does have a number of challenges, and those are economic challenges, but also social challenges, which is really why we were attracted to SPI and really makes SPI a perfect fit for what we're trying to do. And Philadelphia is the 6th largest city in the US, but if you compare us to other large cities, We have the highest poverty rate. About 25% of our population is below the poverty line. We have the highest homicide rate. We have an ongoing gun violence crisis in the city. The highest drug overdose rates, the lowest median income. So there's really substantial problems and challenges that we're trying to tackle as a city government, and wanted to be able to use and make sure that we're investing those federal resources in the best way possible. So, not only do we want to invest, make sure we're investing those well, but we want to be able to track those over time as well. Can we make sure if we have a data tool like Social Progress Index, can we update it, every 18 months, every couple of years, and see the investments, the benefits and the progress being made across the city. So we've been working with SPI over the sort of last year or so to develop a really granular look at the Social Progress Index in Philadelphia. And hopefully you can all see this is the map here, and we've done it at a really granular geographic level, which really lets us target our spending and target our initiatives across the city. And this is at the census tract level, so this is areas about 4,000 residents or so. So really zoomed in and trying to think about the best way to target the city spending, city investments across the city. And as you can see from this map, there's really stark divides in the Social Progress Index across the city. So the areas with the lowest, the sort of worst performing areas of the city, the darkest sort of purples and blues, with an SPI score of about 25, they're about 3 times lower than the areas of the city with the highest scores. Those are the areas with the sort of brightest yellow in this map. So there's clearly a very strong geographic divide here, and a real need for the city to think strategically about investing in these different neighborhoods and guiding how taxpayer money is being spent across the city. And I'll just wrap up with something that our office has tried to emphasize throughout this process, and we've been thinking a lot about, and that's the need for equity in the city's spending and the city's budget, and racial equity in particular. If you look at the areas of Philadelphia with the lowest scores, those are the same areas with majority non-white population. So that's what I'm showing here. We've highlighted those majority non-white areas of the city in red, and there's a very strong correlation and overlap with the areas of the city that have the lowest Social Progress Index scores. And we really view SPI as a tool that will help the city advance racial equity in its budget and how it spends taxpayer dollars. And we can use it as a tool to explore the kind of the cross section of social progress and race in the city. So we're very excited about the tool. We'll be, as I said, we'll be launching it shortly, and sort of hopefully within the next month or so. And I just I'll wrap up there. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity and the partnership with SPI, and we're really looking forward to continuing to use SPI in Philadelphia.
Great, Nick. Thank you so much. So that was, everyone, that was the tease presentation. This is not quite out yet, Nick, but the data is going to be released soon. So don't look for it now, everyone, but it's coming up. And it's just fantastic work at that level of granularity. And just the spread of scores across one city, that range of different quality of life is quite extraordinary. And, what we're really excited to do is carrying on working with you, Nick, seeing how the change actually starts to happen, because that's the exciting bit that we're really interested in. So thank you so much. Great. Now, we talked earlier about the global challenge around rights. And so I'm delighted to have with us Emily Caswell, who's going to lead a conversation about this. Emily's job is head of special projects at the BBC, which means I guess she kills people or something. But Emily, over to you to lead the next conversation. You're on mute, Emily.
Thank you so very much. I just think it's really important for at least once in a conversation for me to go on mute when I shouldn't be, just to make everybody feel comfortable, because we all do it all the time, or at least I do. But so lovely to be back here again and with this community after having the really transformative conversations in Banff for those of us who are able to go to beautiful Canada or are based there. We're going to be talking about something in the next half an hour, 25 minutes, which is so important and also super challenging, because earlier we were talking about the decline in personal rights and the stagnation in inclusiveness as revealed by the latest Social Progress Index. And I'm going to introduce 4 brilliant speakers, but of course, just before I do that, just to kind of, we will be discussing that retreating rights is really one of the biggest breaks on social progress. And as SPI has revealed, 2/3 of the countries measured have seen a decline of the rights in the last 10, 11 years or so. Let me now introduce our guests. So if you would, I'd like to invite you, Karen, and also Mimi, and also Jaime to get to come on camera and to unmute yourself in our conversation. And maybe we can even be highlighted by the technical magicians in our conversation who are taking part behind the scenes. So I can clearly see all our guests, and everybody can see our guests too. So I'm going to just introduce each of you. And when I introduce you, if it's okay, I'm going to ask you just to very briefly say something about what rights means to you personally. So I'm going to kick off with Karen Joseph. So if you'd like to get on camera, that would be fantastic, and free to unmute yourself if you are able to get on camera. And if not, you can stay with your lovely photo. That's fine too. And Karen is the leader of the First Nation community in Canada, the eldest daughter of a hereditary chief and a matriarch, and a real visionary leader, I think, if I'm right, Karen. A co-founder of CEO Reconciliation Canada, has really driven reconciliation efforts for the last 30 years, and also a lot of concrete actions in support of those who have suffered so traumatically at the face of spending time in these Indian residential schools. And I had a really memorable conversation with you that I really remember very sharply in the Banff Conference Centre while we were watching elks through the window, munch dandelions. So Karen, let me come to you and ask you, what does rights mean to you personally, briefly?
It's a really interesting question for me. It has more to do with, less to do with the legalities and more to do with the social realities that we're living in. And I think the level of equity that I experience, or our children experience on a daily basis. One of the things that we say about reconciliation is we won't have achieved reconciliation until all of our children can walk down the street and be treated with dignity. Independent of any I'm sorry's or financial contributions or big initiatives that are going forward, unless we have the opportunity to be seen as human beings within the greater society and to be valued for the wisdom and the knowledge that we bring to that society, or could bring to that society. I don't think that those rights will be achieved. And I think that really the idea is all of us as human beings being able to contribute based on our own specific traumas and our own specific life experiences, the knowledge and the wisdom that we bring forward. I think that it's kind of a little bit of an oxymoron for me being involved with the Social Progress Index, because typically these kinds of initiatives don't work well or don't even include Indigenous people. So on one hand, I'm really, really grateful to be here. And on the other hand, I'm really curious to see in the long run how we're able to reflect those kinds of realities within these types of, there are so many examples I can give you.
We'll hold off you there a second. But thank you so much. It was really very powerful and a really beautiful way to start this conversation, not just talking about the challenges, but about envisaging in a world where everybody is recognized for their knowledge and contributions and lived experiences. And it's less about illegality, but more about the social reality. So every kid can walk down the street together, being fully knowledgeable about their being recognized. So it's very, very powerful stuff, Karen. Thank you very much for that. Mimi Mazia, Maziani. You're president of the Texas Civil Rights Project. You've directed voting rights programs for multiple political campaigns, as well as teaching and practicing law, both at election law cases in federal courts across the USA, but also the Supreme Court. And I know that you teach also, of course, at the University of Texas School of Law. What does rights mean, Mimi, for you personally?
Well, thank you, Emily, for the question. I agree with Karen. It's a really important question, and I am delighted to be here with all of you answering it. I also have to laugh a little bit, Emily. The way I say my last name is Marziani, but I have been informed by my husband's cousins in Italy that that is the incorrect pronunciation. So, whatever you want to say. Karen, I loved your answer. And I also found it interesting because my answer is from a very different vantage point. Perhaps it's the company, but I was thinking of Winston Churchill and his repeated phrase that democracy might be the worst form of government, except for everything else that we've all tried. And from my perspective, democracy, that is correct. And democracy only works if we have protections in place for fundamental aspects of human dignity. At the very least, I think that means that you protect, there's kind of a no-fly zone for government. And I think in best case, you're facilitating the things that we need to be full and happy and equal human beings. But together, I do think that, you can't have democracy without robust protections of rights and vice versa. So it's one of the many reasons I'm so excited for this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Mimi. I'll just go with your first name here. And it's really very powerful about the importance of government providing this robust protection of people, both just a no-fly zone, but more fundamentally so that people, in a way, following up some of the thoughts that Karen had said, can live this happy, fulfilled and equal lives. Really, really critical. So I want to turn to our last guest here, Jaime Garcia, and please correct me in any pronunciation. You're regional director of the Social Progress Index in Latin America, as well as being the senior global advisor of the SPI. And you are in charge of developing these SPI projects at the subnational level in all of Latin America. And I know not only are you working with countries, municipalities, but also businesses right across the score, as well, of course, as your academic role and a guest columnist for Forbes Central America. So what, Jaime, is your personal understanding, or what do you want to personally talk about what rights mean to you?
Hi, Emily. Thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here talking about this specific issue that is challenging social progress around the world, but specifically in Latin America. Now, my perspective about rights, I can tell you that rights are those set of values, institutional and social values, that let us have opportunities, freedom, capabilities, and allows every people to reach their own potential. Now, from my personal perspective, I will use, if you let me, to use the global language of football, because as a Mexican in Costa Rica, where football is a big issue, rights are important, because rights allow me to go from my house to the National Costa Rican Stadium wearing the colors of Mexico and my flag, knowing that I will be able to return not only safe and sound, but also enjoying the whole experience, even when Mexico wins, which, by the way, happens very often. But anyway, rights allow me to be a Mexican fan in a foreign country and be a happy fan and enjoy with others. And that's part of what makes society to work and prosper. And that's why we need to protect the personal rights and the rights around the world.
That's a beautiful personal example. I can imagine you walking off as a foreigner locally, going off to your football match, and enables us to think of the so many rich fibers which need to be embedded in our structures in order that we can all feel fully free and enjoy and flourish together. It's a lot of really positive, beautiful thoughts from all of you that we aspire to. But unfortunately, the statistics that come from this latest Social Progress Index don't talk about overwhelmingly at all, positive trends. In fact, quite the opposite, with 2/3 of countries seeing a decline in the last decade or so, including Canada, UK, and USA, but also the biggest decline seeing in Africa, Central America, Chad, Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, and all really big moves of concern. And that's the big picture, and there's also the small picture and the more intimate minorities who are excluded and suffer some of the most challenging circumstances. I want to first turn to some of these G7 countries, which many of us belong to. And by the way, I am looking at the chat. So although we're going to have a Q&A in a couple of 10 minutes, if there's anything that questions you want to put, I'll try and keep an eye on it and bring them into the conversation. And then we'll also be able to bring in your voice and other thoughts in a little minute or so. So what's going on in G7 countries? I mean, we know about the war in Ukraine. We've got more authoritarianism in Russia. We've got Italy. We've got growing inequality and discrimination. But why are we seeing this big backward move? Any of your thoughts? Just put up your hand virtually, or a yellow hand or a black hand, or any other hand that you'd like to put up if you want to have, be able to shed light on the why of what's going on.
Well, I can jump in.
Yeah, please do.
I, for better or for worse, have a front row seat to these sorts of problems in the United States, and particularly in Texas. I think there's kind of two big trends I would point to. One is the severe strain on democracy. And I think that is driving a decline in rights. And then, as I noted before, the decline in rights is then in turn continuing to reinforce a decline in democracy. So it's a really, really troubling dance that we're seeing play out. Why is democracy declining in the United States? There is a wide variety of reasons, but one thing I would point to is, even though the United States, for instance, was built on this idea of a diverse, pluralist society, obviously the framers' view of that is very different than what's today. And, you can just start with folks who are indigenous to the United States and go from there, all the groups of people who have been oppressed. And I think that as we are seeing society become rapidly more diverse, look very, very different than generations before, and as it's threatening all sorts of status quo, that has also been resulting in a very defensive crouch by some people in charge that in turn is really gumming up the works of our democracy. So, I'm not as familiar with other countries, but I certainly, I think there's a lot of examples of how we've seen this in Europe in particular and in the UK in particular.
And Karen, to go to you, given that you've done so much work and in Canada over many decades in terms of the rights of Indigenous people in particular, what's your perspective here? Do you think it's the defensive mode where people feel challenged? What do you think's at the heart of some of these issues, the way you see it? Are you on mute?
I think, thank you for that. I'm getting a light up here that makes anyway, but for me, it's a really interesting place to be, because within the constructs of Canada, we continue to exist as Indigenous people under the Indian Act, which is a very, very, how would you say it? It's a very racialized inhibitor to who we are as Indigenous people, and even those individuals that come in as newcomers to Canada actually have more rights than we do in terms of accessing a whole bunch of different things. And all of this is just coming to the light in the last 10 or 15 years. If I think Canada's and I'm horrible with numbers, so these are generalizations. Canada certainly lands in the top 10 in the G7 for most indicators. However, if you suss out, if you put in and just focus on Indigenous people, we actually fall to somewhere around 36 or 37 within our own country. And so we have those third world realities. And the other piece of it has to do with identity. Our identity is governed by that Indian Act. And so although we have one of the fastest youth growing populations, all of a sudden now people are interested in what we can do in terms of becoming involved in the economic sectors within the countries. And yet, we have difficulties getting into those leaderships because the language of French and English are the recognized languages here. And so somebody who speaks a traditional language is excluded from those positions because typically you only speak one and your own. So there's so many different places. And because of this renewed energy, we're finding now this idea of pretendians, right, that are coming in and putting their voice in the place of people that actually have those lived experiences and that are the ones that need to guide us. So I'm really grateful to be here in particular because it allows us to get into that. My background happens, to be health and specifically public health. And so the idea of trying to suss out these kind of indicators that are going to give us some long-term prognosis, but hopefully to influence not the easy numbers, but the harder numbers, and how do we define those? Because the reality is, if we don't do that, I mean, we've been talking about the same gap for 50 years and we've seen no movement in it. We're never going to, unless we change what those parameters are. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And there's so much going on in my mind because this is sort of where we started from.
It's great for you to hear, Karen. And I have to say, I hadn't heard of a pretendian before. So thank you for educating me on that. But to talk about the interrelationships, and there's so many different factors that minorities are having to contend with as they try and regain their rightful place in society as equals. Jaime, there's a number of Latin American countries. We've also seen a decline in this particular area of rights, and I'm wondering if there's obviously particular nuances within each country, but do you see any big trends? And it's so interesting also, Mimi, your notion that the strain on democracy and the decline of rights unfortunately go hand in hand in a negative spiral. And we'll have hear from you, Jaime, and then let's talk about some of the ways in which we might tackle some of this downward spiral. So Jaime, your thoughts, Latin America in particular.
Well, yes, Emily, and when talking about what's happening in Latin America, also this is related to what is happening in the United States. And when we're talking about what's happening in Africa, in Asia, we know that it's going to affect also Europe, because, and this is part of what you already asked at the beginning with these 7 countries. We know that institutions, that society, we change very slow. Actually, when you see the trends in the Social Progress Index, we see that those components are more slow in terms of change. However, there are others that move quick, like, for example, access to information and communications. Right now, everybody is connected, and that connection is helping us to know what's happening in other places, to connect with other people that think like us, and also to develop different social dynamics. Now, this is changing really fast, but at the same, what is changing really fast is that people know that in the United States, you can earn 10 times what you are earning here in Latin America. So now you can move to that place. The same happens in Africa and Europe. So the institutions are not adapted to these quick changes that we are seeing in societies. And when you see about Latin America, well, migration is one of the outcomes of this deterioration of personal rights. There are some common factors that are affecting on the region. The first is, of course, we remain a highly unequal region. And let me put you an example. Panama is the highest income country in Latin America. Its GDP per capita is ranked 46. However, they have child stunting as a huge problem. They are ranking 86. So there are huge problems in the richest country of Latin America. Unfortunately, also, if we take into account the context of the pandemic, poverty grew according to ECLAC practically to levels that we haven't seen in the last 27 years. So we are moving forwards 3 decades at least. Also, we remain one of the most insecure and most violent regions in the world. And using data, again, from SPI, interpersonal violence in Brazil put that country ranking 162 of 169 countries. Colombia, 167. My country, Mexico, 160. We haven't solved the problems of personal safety. We are completely deadlocked in the fight against corruption. We are also a region with high levels of corruption. Paraguay is 117, Honduras 146. And also, if we think about a system, and again, part of the strengths of the Social Progress Index and its framework is that we can understand the relations between health, between personal safety, between rights, but also environment. 54% of all global deforestation is concentrated in Latin America. And when you think about this, and also connected with that, these countries depend on natural resources to generate income, then the crisis of rights is also a crisis of social progress and economic growth. And people here in Latin America, they don't trust democracy anymore. Remember that democracy in Latin America is practically new. We started with democracy, electoral democracy in the 80s, in the 90s of the last century. But we lost that trust because democracy didn't reflect inner quality of life or social progress. We trust the church and the army more than the government or policy parties. That's part of the problem that we are seeing.
I mean, it's, you know, bringing in so many themes from migration to inequality to violence to corruption, which all feed into rights. And I'm very happy, by the way, if people want to pop any questions in the chat, or will be really, really helpful as well to get the feeling from the floor. But I have a challenge to all three of you, just to briefly, because we've only got a few minutes. From what all of you have said, rights is integral to so much more than being something that's, you know, a small factor. It's so embedded in so many of the ways we live our lives. And yet, human rights is portrayed, particularly in the media, as being a minority interest. And therefore, people might not see it as something that is integral to the health of a society. What can we do to make human rights feel more mainstream in order to educate people so they feel it's something worth fighting for? Any sort of last thoughts from me, roundup thoughts from all of you? Mimi, you're nodding there.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, making it personal. And one thing in the United States that, of course, has happened very recently is we lost the constitutional right to make, you know, for women to make choices about their own pregnancy. And I will tell you, just from my own vantage point, I'm 40 years old. I graduated from law school in 2008. And I remember having conversation in law school. I thought that was a done deal. You know, those rights were solidified and that it was essentially not worth talking about at great length. And so I share that just because I do think that that is a shocking, and to half the population in the United States, very personal strike that just happened. And it'll be interesting to see, you know, one indication will be how this plays out in the coming elections. But we are seeing indications right now, for instance, that women are registering to vote at greater numbers. Women are being politically involved in greater numbers, particularly young women. So, you know, I guess we'll see what an impact that makes. But I do think that that is, you know, kind of one data point of how, when you make this really personal for people and help them understand all the ways it impacts their lives, you can really spring people into action.
It's a beautiful point. Thank you so much, Mimi. And Dr. Jolan Mavis Christie has just put in the chat about, you know, the question around how can civil society organizations help improve the SPI in their communities, and particularly for this conversation around rights, and interested in the chat for people to suggest ideas on how things can be made. David Whiten, and maybe you're referring to Roe versus Wade regarding the one step back, so a leap forward can be made. So there's a real deeper recognition of how rights affect us all. Karen, your thoughts briefly on, just very briefly, we're running out of time here, on ways to help people understand that human rights is rights for everybody, is not a minority interest?
No, not at all. I think, wow, that's so tough. You know, what happened to us in Canada was done through the authority of the government and was perpetrated by the church, where you know, at the lowest count, 150,000 of our children were taken away and put in these residential schools for most of their life, and over 90% of them suffered a lifelong debilitating injury as a result of that, and you know, over 50% died. And now we're knowing that those are the ones that have been counted, and we're finding across this country the graves of thousands and thousands of other young ones who were killed during that time. And this is in the recent future. This is ancient. This is not ancient history. And this was not something that was done without knowledge by the governments. It was done intentionally to try to engage us in the mainstream societies. We didn't need sort of the European influences within Canada as Indigenous people, because we were self-sufficient. And once we were forced to go underneath that Indian Act and become wards of the state in essence, then that allowed them access to all of our lands, all of our resources, all of our women, all of our children, our men. They could limit every aspect of our life, and they continue to. And most importantly, they control our identity. And we currently are under a system that will see Indigenous people, as we know, eradicated likely within the next three generations, because of the kind of way that we're identified here in Canada. And so I think that when we're talking about human rights, if you're looking at the levels of violence and murder amongst Indigenous women, if you're looking at the levels of children who are being taken away today, all of those things still exist. The only thing is they exist in magnitudes so much larger than before. And unless we start recognizing that, Canadians, and unless we start working together as civil societies and start viewing reconciliation not as an activity, but as you mentioned earlier, a shared value. It's who we are as a country is determined by how we show up each and every day and what we do each and every day, not just within work, but within our own families. And so I think there's that opportunity that we have, especially with young people, to get those kinds of messages out and to remind us, which sounds so silly, but that we are part of a country and we are responsible for how that country shows up, through the way we elect people, through the way we develop our policies and that. So there's so much to be said on this, and I'm really glad we're having this conversation, and I'm going to just very, very difficultly keep it there for now.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Karen. And you spoke about how to make more people understand the importance of rights, of recognition of shared values, but you also demonstrated the power of stories and how powerful individual stories like the one that you shared with us just now can be to help people understand the impact of where human rights are not in place. And Jaime, just to finish with you, your thoughts?
Yes, Emily. First, I think that we need to understand that we can't change the system in the way that we used to change it in the past, from top to the bottom. Now we need to go from the bottom to the top because we have problems at the top. Now, here in the Social Progress Network, we have worked with different initiatives with civil society and businesses. And what we have seen is that to change this system, what we need is clarity, transparency, accountability to recover the trust that we lost in the region. We need meaningful actions that can translate into a change in social progress of the population. Innovative, because we need to reinvent what we have done here. But also the last one of what we have seen is we need to have empathy. to understand the different contexts that we are seeing inside our countries, inside our communities, and generate a common language based on change on the system and these rules of the game that are the rights.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. I love your thought ending on empathy, but of course it's not just empathy, it's also the clarity, transparency and accountability in all that we can innovate. And Monica on the chat reminds us that rights and freedoms can change so quickly the moment money and power is at play. And of course, we've seen what's been happening in Ukraine and Russia, you know, in the space of a blink of an eye, a year only. I might just leave with the words of Edward, who said that, who writes to us from post-Soviet Georgia, and he says, the best advice, look to the West, take the best, leave the rest. So thank you so much, Jaime and Karen and Mimi. I'm very, very grateful, and people can continue the discussion on the chat and in other spaces afterwards. And I'll hand back to you, Michael.
Right, Emily, thank you so much. You always steer such a wonderful conversation, and great to have Karen, Mimi and Jaime to join you in that. It's fantastic. And, you know, I think when we built the Social Progress Index, one of the big decisions we made was to make sure that personal rights were an integral part of this. Too much of our global development conversation is focused on, you know, physical things, you know, things that matter, things like poverty, things like health. And too often things like rights and inclusion are left out of those frameworks. So bringing that together and saying you can't be a good society unless you're protecting rights and giving inclusiveness, I think is a very powerful part of the framework. We've actually got a new paper coming out, I think today or tomorrow, actually analysing these personal rights issues in greater detail. And I think just to give an optimistic note, although we've seen a lot of countries going backwards, others have gone forwards. There are positive examples, positive lessons to be dug into. All the data is available on our website, socialprogress.org. Dig in, it's a resource to help us not just see where the problems are, but see where the solutions are and to fundamentally see what works. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. It's time to close now. I love these events. It's like having a wonderful dinner party with the most fantastic guests. Some I've known well, some I'm meeting for the first time. It's been a real pleasure to spend time with you and really learned a lot and really been inspired by such a great set of speakers. Thank you all. Good night, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you again somewhere on one of these forums soon. Thank you. Goodbye.